So Vega Lite's based on this idea of like a static scheme or static config that you pass into it. It looks something like this. Generating this is obviously complicated, and it's very particular. And so like writing code to generate these things can become pretty unwieldy pretty quickly. Um, there's this library that's kind of been sitting a little bit in the background, that Vega, like the folks behind Vega and Vega Lite, they published this a couple of years ago. Um, but basically, it allows you to have a programmatic API to generating these complicated configs. So this is pretty nice. It just basically means that you can generate these configs in a less error-prone way. Um, and so my demo, which is almost a non-demo, is like if I start clicking around here, you see we get charts, kind of charts that we would expect to get today. The big difference here is this is all running through, it's a branch on my local that's running through this library instead of the code that we've had. And the goal here is to continue building on this in order to support things like, common requests where we have like data labels on multiple measures, or the ability to add trellising relatively quickly, things like that, or the ability to like tweak the density of our labels because they can often sort of occlude each other. So yeah, this all runs through this new code path using this library. Um, One really cool thing is the way I've built it is as soon it does feature detection. So as soon as it detects a config that it's not compatible with, it drops back to using the code we have in place. So it gives us a nice progressive way to roll it out. So for example, this two measures it knows it doesn't support, and so seamlessly just drops back to the old code path. So we can roll this stuff out, over time.
Um,
And to give you,
it quick question. Is the idea that like users would still be able to touch the Vega config that spits out, or is this new sort of intermediate the thing that people would touch? Like, what's your thought there?
yeah, so at the end of the day, it is just generating a Vega config. So we should be able to open it here. And not totally sure why it just fell back to the old one. Um, but we'll definitely, like, you'll definitely still be able to interact with the Vega config in the advanced editor if that's what you want to do. I think there is a compelling, potential use case for supporting this syntax,
Yeah.
just because it is a lot clearer and easier to work with. Um, yeah, there are some technical reasons why it was difficult to get this working in our infrastructure. So part of the work I've been doing is basically making our infrastructure compatible with this library. Specifically, like the library doesn't support TypeScript right now, so I had to do some work to make that happen. Um, but yeah, I guess this is a good reminder that like this branch is very alpha. It's not going into production in probably the next week or two. Hoping in, within 3 to 4 weeks, like it'll be out there and silently running in the background. Um, and the last thing I just want to demonstrate is the like what this code looks like. So basically the way it works is we're using this library called Zod under the hood. Zod lets you define schemas for like different data structures in your application. And we use this all over the place to deal with like data that we're sending back and forth between like the browser and the server, things like that. In this case, what I'm actually trying to do is I'm trying to parse the config we store for a visualization in our database, and then have a declarative way of saying like we accept the config that you're sending us and it can use the new code pathway, or that config has some feature like data labels that we don't currently support. So like for example here you can see this set of unsupported features, and Zod will parse the config and tell us like okay it's compatible or not, and then we can run forward and and choose which code path to go down. And then the other really cool thing about Zod is not only is it a parsing library, but it also has affordances for doing transformations. So we can take our relatively complicated uh, config that we store internally and reduce it down to a very small tractable config that this new code pathway can operate on. So for example, like we know that we want to support like a color channel and like an X channel. And these things, Vega needs a field in the data to map them to. So we know we need to have a field property. Another good example is like for calculating titles, we pull data from different parts of our config. And so this just brings that fairly complicated calculation like higher up into the code. So it only has to happen in one place. So this thing spits out basically a new object, and then the code that actually generates these charts, if I go back, it's literally right now it's 50 lines of code. So huge reduction in surface area internally. Um, this is currently handling the basic XY cases along with XY color stacking cases. Um, so obviously I expect this like numbers of lines of code here to grow, but I won't be surprised if it's like an order of magnitude fewer lines than we currently have. It just basically means it's going to be a lot easier to support long term. Also going to be a lot easier to add new features long term. So I know been a huge amount of appetite for Viz features. I see them every week. And just throwing this out there as like a heads up that it's coming. So